Okay. Okay. I think we're on. Are we live, Chris?
Waiting for the,
Wait.
you can just go ahead and talk. It takes a while.
Okay. I'm going to say we're live. We're in. Hey, welcome to Happy Succeeding in the Future of Work. And today I got this amazing guest. This is a very different kind of podcast. So Joseph Araujo, do I have that pronounced right?
Araujo? Yeah, that works. Araujo.
Close enough. Araujo from Mindset Pharma. And basically, if I understand it, and I really was never that good in science in school. I don't know why. I just wasn't bad, but it just wasn't my thing. But the little I understand is during the 60s, you had LSD, you had all these kind of illicit drugs. And it turns out, from my understanding, Joe's going to talk a lot about it, is that these properties were kind of frowned upon by the government. Now we're finding out 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years later that these kind of LSD-ish type, acid type chemicals
drugs
actually help with mental health, with depression, with PTSD, with like anything, right? So maybe you could share your mission and what you're doing and how you're taking these things that once were taboo and vilified and really helping people.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me the chance to speak on this, Jack, and it's great to see you again. And so, at Mindset, we really are focused on developing, new psychedelic drugs, which are in a lot of ways based on drugs that people have known about for a long time, things like LSD, things like psilocybin and DMT, and developing them as medicine. And it's interesting because a lot of these drugs were initially used as medicines, at least, in Western culture, so you had LSD, which was being investigated for a series of, mental health conditions, substance abuse, for example, and drugs like MDMA, referred to as ecstasy, which was really popular in the club culture of the 80s, was originally developed as a therapeutic agent. And there were, and I think one of the challenges is a lot of the work that was done early on in the 50s and 60s wasn't really up to the same level of wasn't done at the same level as we do clinical trials today, right? So you had therapists using these compounds, they were getting positive results, but nobody was running a placebo-controlled clinical trial, which is really important today for understanding whether a drug is going to work as a medicine, and it's a long, expensive process. And then the counterculture of the 60s sort of caused a vilification of these drugs. The recreational use rather than the medicinal use, made governments around the world sort of decide that these drugs were dangerous. Reports of people potentially harming themselves, and the shift was the complete opposite, and these drugs became almost impossible to do research on. And so everything kind of stopped in the 70s and through the 80s. And then in the early 2000s, various groups got permission to start, looking at these drugs again and trying to understand them from a different framework. The framework of, can these drugs help people who, patients who have, neuropsychiatric diseases, treatment-resistant depression, diseases that can't be helped by other drugs that we have today, or they're not getting benefit. And then that created the potential of, hey, these are people who really need something to help with their disease. And we've tried everything that's sort of out there today, and we need something new. And so then that shifts the sort of paradigm to, well, maybe we can look at these compounds, which we thought were really bad, and understand whether there might be some real medicinal value in them. And so going along that trajectory, we sort of see the first generation compounds like LSD and MDMA and psilocybin. A lot of them are natural products. And what we know, or what, pharmacologists and drug developers have done for a real long time, is take something that's natural, modify the chemistry a little bit, and turn it into a drug. And by a drug, or let's say a clinically useful drug, is one where you can demonstrate that it has value at a specific dose and is manufactured in a consistent way. So rather, we don't think the future is you're going to go into a doctor's office and take 2 grams of magic mushrooms, as an example, just because mushrooms are inherently not consistent in terms of how much psilocybin they have. But you can extract psilocybin and create drugs that are going to behave in a much more consistent way. And then hopefully with proper clinical trials, you can demonstrate that they have a benefit. And that's really what we're trying to do at Mindset.
When you talk about mushrooms, let me ask you this from a novice perspective, from a dumb guy perspective. So you always hear people talk about, I've taken magic mushrooms and my whole mind has been changed. My reality has changed. What's the real deal? I mean, does it, or they just think that happened, or are those mushrooms, those properties so powerful that it can change the way you look at things and change your mood?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one where I don't think there's a single answer. These are really potent drugs. In small doses, they really alter consciousness, reality. And if you kind of look at what's been documented in terms of experience, you do get these mystical type experiences where people have a new view on life. And maybe some of that effect is what's being, what's beneficial for things like treatment resistant depression. What we've seen is the drug seems to work better the more mystical and that experience is. And it's hard to define what a mystical experience is, because it probably differs with everybody. You also hear about experiences that aren't necessarily like that, right? Some of them can be more challenging. You hear about things like ego dissolution. And so this is really an important area of research to try and understand that. And it's important to dissociate, I think, recreational and what could become a wellness use sort of case for these drugs. So, people who are not suffering from, debilitating mental health issues maybe could get some benefit from these, but that's not, that's a whole other field, I think, of research. The field that we're focused on, because I think it's a little bit easier to quantify today and move forward today, is really trying to help patients who have a clear disease. So certainly, I think some of those properties are going to be present across all of those groups. They're potentially properties of the drug. They certainly do alter the way we perceive things and can change the way we think about things. And there's some interesting science as to how or why that might be happening. But it's still very early, I think, in really understanding how these drugs work. And I'd also say the field of neuroscience is still early compared to let's say other medical fields like cardiology, where maybe the heart is a little better understood than the way we think and the way we are conscious and living beings, and how ruminating thoughts can cause long-term mental health issues, for example.
So how does it work? So you'll take some of these properties that could be found in ayahuasca or hallucinogenics, and then tailor them to make substances that you could take ultimately. So someone who's maybe suffering from depression or different mental health issues, and I guess it kind of rewires them in a little bit to help them out.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the rewiring part is certainly one way that people are describing this, but essentially, just speaking at the most simple level, you can take a molecule and make alterations to it, which could potentially change how long it acts. So this is, I think, a real important discussion point in the industry. So today, we're looking at, other folks, not us, are looking at psilocybin assisted psychotherapy for treatment resistant depression. And so people will go into a clinic, they'll have some time with the clinician to prepare them.
Is this kind of like when you get ketamine, or is that something different?
Very, very, very similar in a lot of ways, right? So you get prepared for this psychedelic experience, and then you have some time with therapists afterwards to try and integrate what you might have learned. But that drug component, that drug session with psilocybin is a 6 to 8 hour visit. Oof. and it's quite
expensive.
Intensive. You're going to be in a clinic for 6 to 8 hours. You're going to have 1 or 2 people with you for 6 to 8 hours. And when you start to think about scalability, it becomes challenging to think, how do you get this treatment to that many people? There's only so many people that are, that are able to provide the therapeutic component. And so if you can shorten the duration of that drug experience or that psychedelic experience and still have the same benefit, maybe you could talk about treating 3, 4, 5 patients a day if you could get that short enough. So those are ways we can begin to think about modifying the chemicals to maybe make them a little bit more like a medicine that can be deployed at scale. The other thing that we may find is over time, as more people do this, clinical trials today have really sort of focused on very specific patient groups. But what about elderly? What about people who are maybe on other medications? Are there going to be safety concerns? And so, maybe we can preempt, in advance, begin to think about how we can modify or how we can develop a drug that may be safer for a wider range of patients. So that's certainly ways that we're looking to develop those medicines. So, try and, for lack of better words, keep the best parts and improve the parts that could be improved for patients. And then how it works in the clinic, rewiring is something that people have talked about. So, these compounds can, at least while they're having their effect, change the way brain connectivity works. And then when the effect is over, there's possibilities of maybe changing the way you think moving forward. And people are talking about neuroplasticity. So at a molecular level, your brain changing but once again, you have to sort of change the way you're thinking, change things in your life as well. And I think that's a big part of the therapeutic component. So the drug is part of the tools to potentially help patients.
It seems like you're, to unpack it, like there are 2 different tracks we're talking about. One is kind of, let's say, a ketamine-ish thing where I'm going to go in to maybe a clinician's office, or maybe they'll come to my house. But it sounds like it's more of a wealthy person thing, because you have to have the money. And I don't know if your healthcare will cover it. And you have, like you said, you might have one person who's helping you with the journey, or maybe a couple of people, and this is going to take 6 hours. So I imagine it's pretty expensive. But if you have the money, all right, fine. But you can't really scale that. That's for a very small, subset of people. But what you're looking to do is to take the compounds and be able to have it where it could. This is so trippy, because it seems like you could take, kind of the essence of it, and then it's going to kind of change the way you think, which is amazing, right? Because you're living your whole life one way. Let's say you're always depressed, or you were in a war and you're suffering from post-traumatic stress, and then all of a sudden that could change. That's right. That's just remarkable.
But it is remarkable, and it's really exciting, because ketamine was, I think, one of the first drugs that's been around. It's an approved medicine. It's a dissociative anesthetic, and it's now available, and it's not necessarily being paid for through insurance companies yet, but there is a possibility that can change with more data. And I think if you can demonstrate a case and a cost benefit risk case for paying for these, then it will be available to more people. And I think that's going to be a big part of where this industry that's going to be something the industry will have to address moving forward. And to do that, you need to develop these compounds in a very specific way for patients, and then go through the insurance company payers routes to understand how they're going to be paid for. So today it probably is more in the realm of those that are wealthy, but most of these drugs haven't been approved yet, right? So psilocybin's not approved, it's in clinical trials. MDMA is not yet approved, but over time that could certainly change. And when you look at something like PTSD, where there's really no other treatments out there, how much, if you can quickly and for a long time improve or help somebody with PTSD, how much more benefit does that bring in from a cost perspective to society? What are we not paying for, right? It's a different way of sort of looking at it. What we know is, the traditional way for a lot of patients of taking home a drug and taking it once daily for 6 months or maybe longer doesn't work for everyone. And so we're paying for that. Maybe once again we'll have to understand what the costs are truly going to be. And today people do go to the hospital for things like hemodialysis, for example, right? So there are ways to think about this in a more traditional way in terms of being paid for through insurance programs and healthcare.
Now, how far are you along in your trials to bringing something to market?
Yeah, so Mindset today is where we call at a preclinical stage. So before you ever put a new drug into people, there's a really clear pathway. First, you want to have some idea that it does what you think it's going to do. And we've done a lot of work comparing our drug to drugs that are known, like psilocybin and LSD and DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT. And so we've been able to benchmark our drugs in preclinical models, whether that's cells in a petri dish or whether that's in animals. And then you can begin to understand how our drugs differ from the drugs that we know about. And then the next sort of steps will be to demonstrate that these drugs show a reasonable safety profile in animals, so that one is comfortable, or more importantly, a regulatory agency is convinced that this is going to be reasonably safe for what you're trying to treat, to move it into a person. So we're within about a year of being in people. So it's going to happen soon, but we're still at that sort of preclinical stage where we're now moving on. We believe these molecules will work maybe even better than drugs like psilocybin in some cases. We have some compounds that are going to be shorter acting, but we'll really begin to understand how they behave in people and how people behave on the drugs, hopefully within the next year.
So you basically have what, dogs and cats tripping in your lab over the
yeah. So I mean, we don't
acid trips. Is that what's happening, sort of, or?
We don't have labs at Mindset, but we're working with other groups that do. And so typically you do a lot of the work in rodents, mouse and rat, but the FDA, for example, requires a non-rodent species for at least safety. So whether or not dogs can trip or monkeys trip, I don't know, but they certainly, if they do, they probably will have that experience at some point. And once again, it's to understand that these drugs are going to be safe. Traditionally the understanding is physiologically these drugs are quite safe, so that their major effect is in within the brain or mind, depending on who you ask. And but that there's fairly low risk of long-term health concerns, especially when you're only getting maybe one dose a year or every 3 months.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So, because when you said rewire, it seems like it can be done quickly and not have to take that medicine all the time. So would it be something where maybe it might not be a one and done, but not like you're popping 3 pills a day every day for the rest of your life?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that are, I would say, very surprising when you look at some of the clinical trials that people are talking about. So one is that a lot of these compounds, including ketamine and potentially psilocybin and others, seem to be very fast acting compared to traditional antidepressants, which can take 6 to 8 weeks to sort of have a benefit, right? Which can be important for some patient groups. So they potentially work really quickly. And what's even more interesting in a lot of ways is that a single dose seems to have a long-lasting benefit. So, there's studies, and we're still trying to understand that, but studies that are looking at patients 12 weeks after, 6 months after, and you're seeing long-lasting effects. In a smoking cessation trial, you saw a really impressive rate of people who didn't start smoking again even after a year compared to other methods. And even though those are very small trials, so it's difficult to say whether that will be the case for everybody, but it's certainly really promising, and it changes in a lot of ways the way we're thinking about drugs for these types of indications. One time and a benefit that lasts for months, it really changes the sort of treatment paradigm and the way maybe the way we'll start thinking about how best to treat patients.
It almost sounds like a miracle drug in a way, in the sense that it could kind of, I don't want to say cure you, but help you fairly quickly. And what I don't understand is, why wouldn't, let's say, the government and other agencies kind of stand behind companies like yours to help fast track it? Because let's be frank, I mean, let's just take our country. Well, I know you're from Canada, so we'll take Canada. You're like US anyway, so like you're part of it. So like Canada, US, and you're probably like here in the US, so I won't speak for you, we're all at each other's throats. Everyone is depressed. Everyone is anxious. Everyone is stressed out of their minds. I mean, it's no secret. You just go on social media, you just see how like unhinged people are. In real life, you see how unhinged people are. So you would think, wait, let's maybe fast track. So if there's a chance that you could kind of have, if someone is suffering depression, I think everybody at this point in time is somewhere on that depression schedule, spectrum over the last 2 years. So, even the most, mentally fit person, 2 years of this, it kind of wears you down. So you would think something like this would be like, hey, maybe this is one of these we roll out to make people feel better and happier. And especially, it sounds like it's not too dangerous and it's long lasting. So why isn't there like this movement to really, bring a lot of cash into this space?
Yeah, so I think government is doing their part in helping. So in the U.S. specifically, MDMA has received breakthrough status, which basically means larger clinical trials and a potential to fast track a drug approval, and psilocybin has as well. So, from a regulator's perspective, it's basically they see that need, and they're acknowledging that need, and they're allowing companies to move their compounds through faster than a standard, let's say, drug development process. So I think that's happening. The reality is making things quicker still takes time. You still want to demonstrate, one, that there's an effect, and two, that these compounds are going to be safe for greater populations. But certainly, I think the way people are looking at these drugs, both regulators, politicians, there's in the US you have a large veteran segment, right? So PTSD is a real important market segment there for treatment, and so we are seeing that, and the US in a lot of ways is leading that, so it's great to see, and I think more regulators around the world will take note.
Have you seen in other countries, have they been approved? And if so, like what kind of results have you seen?
So, I mean, ketamine has been approved as an intranasal formulation, and there's some data available, but within the space that Mindset's really focused on, which are these, we call them tryptamine hallucinogens, things like psilocybin and DMT and 5-methoxy DMT. there hasn't been a formal approval yet. What we have are several companies that are in regulatory, based clinical trials to understand benefits. So they're reporting now fairly regularly. Compass has completed some phase 2 clinical trials that had some, pretty promising results. I think when you think about a real hard to treat patient segment, treatment-resistant depression, and you saw a benefit that seemed to be long-lasting at least one of the doses. So we'll have a much better understanding on how many patients and how well it works as we move into larger clinical trials. So it's happening. Unfortunately, there was a 30 or 40-year window where nothing was done, but we need to move forward. And I think there's not just understanding psilocybin, but now there's quite a bit of, as in the case with Mindset, there's a real opportunity to improve upon those drugs. So get the ones that work out there and continue to make better drugs or drugs that work better for more people.
And I know as a scientist, you're going through all these trials, but anecdotally, I'd imagine, maybe not you, but other scientists might kind of consult with people who have indulged in ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, all these other stuff. And anecdotally, have you heard success stories? And you have to take it with some doubt because it's not under trials and being watched over by professionals. But anecdotally, does it really come out that yeah, it does help and that people feel better?
I think with I've heard lots of, there's sort of two sides to this. I think we've heard lots of anecdotal stories about people getting better or having dealing with addiction issues. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we get a lot of emails from people who aren't getting any benefit from what's out there and want something different, right? Yeah. So there's certainly a need. The other important aspect, which I think we don't understand yet, is these drugs might not work for everybody. It's unlikely that one drug is going to fix everybody's problems. And that, some people maybe don't, these aren't the right drugs for them, right? So there's some people who have tried it who will probably never do it again. They too intensive an experience or something that was unpleasant. And I think this is where we need to be careful and very responsible that we do this very carefully, that we don't, as much as there's a need, we can't rush through this because we need to make sure that, we're helping people and we're helping the greatest number of people that we can while not harming others in the process.
Because I remember I kind of, as a kid, you'd see these movies or TV shows where some hippie is taking medicine and their mind is just destroyed. So I imagine there's an element, if you're not careful, that these are powerful drugs that maybe could both help you, but if not used correctly or not,
I grew up with the propaganda of the Reagan administration with, in the morning on Saturday morning cartoons, this is your brain on drugs.
Right? You remember with the egg, with the egg on the frying pan?
Yeah, exactly. It's a vivid memory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
really
there was an enormous amount of propaganda, and I think we need to be responsibility includes proper information, and I think we need to get rid of the propaganda. We need to get rid of the emotional stigma around and begin to assess objectively whether there's benefit, which it looks like there will be, and then how much benefit and how do we use these drugs most effectively. There's a lot to learn, but the results up to today have been really promising.
And I think recently you had some big tie-in to help out with it, right? Did you?
Yeah, I when we started Mindset, we were very, we believed that this area was an important area and potentially could change, revolutionize, mental health care. But unlike a lot of the companies at the time when we started, that were focused on first generation drugs or clinical trials or apps to help better understand that, our view was that, there is an opportunity to make better drugs now that, it was becoming a little, a clearer regulatory pathway was being forged, that there was an opportunity to create novel drugs that were potentially better, and that for big pharma to come into the space. And ultimately, big pharma plays an important role in getting medicines to patients and understanding how to treat them, that they would need to see, they would need patent protection on novel molecules, as well as data showing that these molecules might work better. And in January, we announced we're the first, next generation psychedelic company that has a collaboration with a big pharma partner. It's a Japanese company called Otsuka, which has one of the biggest franchises in mental health in terms of a big pharma neuroscience company. So that was a great validation of not only what we thought we could do, but that the model makes sense, and that big pharma is now, which is more quickly than we thought would happen, is now really looking at this space and trying to understand how to get move these drugs forward to get them to patients. So it's really exciting, both in terms of the trajectory of our business, but also for the entire field. It adds another level of validity that these are drugs that are important to look at and understand, especially when a company that's been around for that long and has that experience in mental health, sort of buys in, so to speak.
Yeah, so congratulations. I mean, that's fantastic news. And then I imagine that's going to kind of hasten the development process.
Yeah,
I imagine, right? Because they have some firepower behind them.
They have firepower, which, not just in terms of supporting. So part of the collaboration is they're going to pay for development of 2 of our drug families, the shorter acting drug families, through phase 1 clinical trials. So we're working closely to get those into humans, like we talked about before, and understand their safety, but also just, the experience and the number of experts that are engaged in the project. For a small company like ours, it really brings a lot of firepower in terms of experience and know-how. And they run several clinical trials globally per year. So it really, will really help us, not just with the funding, but also with the expertise and moving things forward much more quickly. So really exciting for us, and we couldn't be happier to have such a great partner working with us on this project.
Well, that's great. I'm glad for you. And when you talk about veterans, because think about it here, and again, I'm not sure what it's like in Canada, but here you hear such sad horror stories about lives are just ruined, and you're serving your country and you end up on the streets being homeless, and it's terrible. And if this kind of pharmaceuticals could help, I mean, there's a big need for it. That's just one sector, but there's so many others like that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's that's one of the things that the whole team is excited about. This can really help if this can help a lot of people, then it's going to be great work. It's work that needs to be done. And I think over the last 10 years, there's been a lot more understanding on the impact of mental health, right? And the conversation is open, but we also need new approaches, new drugs, and so it's a great time. I think everything has sort of come together. People understand that there are a lot of people that
it's for the first time, and you can appreciate this. When growing up, you didn't talk about mental health at all. It just wasn't a thing. I mean, it wasn't you were against mental health. It didn't come up in conversation at all. No. Burnout wasn't a thing. It's like, okay, hey, would it be like, I need a day off, boss, because I'm burned out. Like, what are you talking about? Get to work. Stop it. Walk it off. And now, fast forward, it's completely I'd say not wholly socially acceptable, but for the most part,
Yeah,
it's on the front burner for people to really talk about and talk about openly.
absolutely. I mean, it kind of came from the generation where you didn't talk about it, or you talked
Yeah,
about somebody having a nervous breakdown.
yeah,
And I don't know what a
yeah,
nervous breakdown is.
yeah,
It doesn't fit into what we're talking about
yeah.
today. I mean, and people are willing to discuss the challenges, and life can be hard. So we all need to help support each other a little bit better, right?
Absolutely. Let me ask, this is a silly question, but how do you, when you talk to people on a personal level, go to a party, go out to dinner with, maybe not your friend, people who like you're introduced with, and you talk about what you do for a living. And this goes back to what you said about like how it was kind of villainized and in the past. So are they like disappointed when, because they go, hey, I would think this kind of hippie guy would be doing these kind of drugs. I don't understand. You look like a normal,
Yeah.
regular person. Did you get that
No,
disconnect from folks?
no, not so much. I think everybody,
Yeah,
once again, I think timing is so important. And
yeah,
I get very few people, who aren't interested in learning, who aren't interested in
yeah,
wanting to learn more. And, I thought we'd get a lot more sort of reactive. Well, that sounds like a horrible idea or
yeah,
something, but it's really, I think people in coming out of COVID or going through COVID, which is when a lot of our work was happening, I think it was really at the forefront, people seeing, you know, the deterioration that was going on a lot, they know somebody or it's happening to
yeah.
them, I mean, it was really at the forefront. So no, it's been a really great opportunity. People seem to be very open-minded and really, want to learn more. And I think once again, as long as we're, being objective about what we're doing and we're not trying to build it up to be a miracle cure, and that we understand we need to learn a lot more, then I think, what we don't want to see is another kickback, because this has been oversold by an industry or by a group of people.
Right, right. You don't want to make it so they think it's a magical cure. And then if it's
Yeah,
any less than that, it'd be disappointed. So it's kind of setting the expectations that it could help. It may not help everybody, just like every drug, it's not going to help everybody.
correct.
We have
And
different reactions. Some it works really well, some it doesn't, some you have to tinker with it. But it seems like it's going in the right direction, and that hopefully
Absolutely.
it's going to help. It will help people, maybe not everybody, but it'd be unreasonable, I think, to say
Yeah.
you could have some drug, any drug that helps every single person and it works every single time.
Never
It's just
seen
not how
one of
life
those.
is,
Never
right?
seen
Just
one of those. That's right. Just doesn't
doesn't work
happen,
that way.
does it?
So this is great. Anything else that you have the pipeline in addition, or this is kind of your baby? This
You
is
know,
the
yeah, what I would say is, what we've sort of come across is this chemistry platform that, we've been very focused on hallucinogenic tryptamines, primarily psilocybin, which is in, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and DMT and 5-methoxy
Mhm.
DMT. So you've talked about ayahuasca, that's DMT. But we think we can apply this platform not just to these sort of, in the media well-known psychedelic compounds. We think there's hundreds of psychedelic compounds out there that are somewhat different. We think we can learn more about those and improve upon those, but also, really we are a biotech company focused on mental health and neurological diseases. And so we think we can apply that, and we have a lot more in the pipeline that we're looking to develop. So, there's with Mindset, I think there's a lot of, we're looking at a lot of opportunities to bring drugs that will help people to market, not just one drug. And I think that speaks towards the mission of our company, to really help as many people as possible.
Well, that's great, Joseph. And I when you were saying about the timing, I think you're right. Everything seems to be lining up. I think in as bad as the pandemic was, I think it was good because it did open up the door for conversations about mental health. And I think with the tie-up you have with the Japanese, company and so forth, I think those things are happening because they realize, hey, this is for real. This is serious. And we got to talk about it. We can't pretend it didn't happen. We can't pretend that people aren't angry and stressed and aggravated and depressed and all that kind of stuff. And we want to help. I want to do it. So it's like you're in the right time, right place now, where
Absolutely.
and people need it. And so hopefully you guys kind of get it to market as soon as possible. And then if you don't mind, we'll regroup once it gets closer, or you get something out
Absolutely.
there. We could share like the good news of what's happening.
Yeah, would love to catch up again with you
Okay.
as we keep moving along this
Yeah.
road. And really, it's great that you're interested and
Yeah.
that your listenership will hopefully, this will be beneficial and help people understand what we're trying to do and where it can go, because I think the potential is enormous.
Even though I know it's not out yet, but if people want to stay in touch and kind of look and see updates from where you are, how can they find you? What's the best
So,
place to look?
we're on the website, and I think there's email addresses there. We're happy to speak with folks, and as I said, we get a lot of emails from people in need, but just wanting to help more people understand how this can move forward. So feel free to reach out to us via our website.
So mindset.com, is that?
Mindsetpharma.com.
Mindsetpharma.com. Perfect. Well, Joseph, thank you so much. This is great, because this is what so fun for me, selfishly, is because you get to get great insights of innovation and developments. And I say this probably too often, but I can't stress enough. It's so great where, oftentimes all you hear is the bad news and negativity things. So I love speaking to people who are kind of doing things to help people. And I figure we could all do our part. You're doing your part by being a scientist and coming up with these drugs. In a way, I think I could do my part by highlighting it, so it could kind of make people feel better that there's hope on the horizon, that there are good things and people working on things to help others. So this is fantastic. So I love it. And
really appreciate it, Jack, being part of that as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll hear soon as you get some new developments, okay, in the pipeline. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jack.
Take care, Joe. You're welcome.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.